Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Brink. I'm the Enterprise Chief of Radiology at Mass General Brigham, the Chair of Radiology at the Brigham, and the Chief of Radiology at MGH. And I'm really pleased today to be hosting this QUIIP session. This is the Quick Interviews with Interesting People. And today I'm privileged to interview Dr. Miriam Bredella. Miriam has many titles at the MGH, and I will ask her to enumerate them for you, and then we'll get into some important, interesting questions for her.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim, and thanks for the Research Institute for inviting me. So I'm Miriam Bredella. I'm a professor of radiology at Harvard Medical School. I'm a musculoskeletal radiologist in the Department of Radiology here at MGH. And I'm also vice chair for faculty affairs and clinical operations in our department. And I direct the Center for Faculty Development at MGH. My other leadership role is at Harvard Medical School, where I am the PI and co-director of the KO2 program. So, Jim, take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much, Miriam. And this is, I should have mentioned, this is our 5th edition of Quick Interviews with Interesting People. And Miriam will certainly not disappoint. She has a really interesting background. So Miriam, perhaps you could tell us what drew you to radiology and research initially.
Well, so I was born in Germany, and as a teenager, I was actually really, and in high school, really interested in music. I played the oboe, and I wanted to become a musician, classical musician. Music was all my life. But I also had good grades in school, and I thought about medical school, although I had really no idea what it was about. There are no doctors or no scientists in my family. And in Germany, there is no college, so you go straight to university after high school. So I applied to medical school and I got accepted at the University of Hamburg. And in medical school, I really liked radiology very early on. I just loved looking at the images, being at the center of everything that was going on in the hospital, seeing the most interesting cases and having a lot of interaction with all the referring physicians. So I was really drawn to this. So I did several electives in radiology, not just the mandatory one, and not just at my university, but around the world. And so early on, I formed a network. I wasn't really planning to, but the people I met during these electives, I'm still in touch with today. And then I also got involved in research in radiology. In Germany, you have to write a thesis, do a longer research project, and I actually focus on high resolution CT of the lungs and pulmonary fibrosis in patients with scleroderma. And at that point in medical school, a lot of my friends, they wanted to work in the US. It was very popular. And it was very popular to take the US MLEs. These are the exams you need to practice clinical medicine in the US. I was not interested at all, and I had no plans or no desire to leave Germany and work in the US. But my best friend, she almost forced me to sign up. She was actually the one who signed me up for the exams. She said, oh, let's learn together. We can buy the books together and study together. So I'm eternally grateful for her, because it was so much easier to take these exams while you're still in medical school. And I'm now the only one of all my friends who actually made it to the US. So never say never, one of my mottos. And then in my last year of medical school, I did a radiology rotation at UCSF, University of California, San Francisco. And at that point, I was really interested in doing chest imaging, but I met a bone radiologist who suggested to spend some time in the bone reading room, where I met Harry Janant, who was a world famous musculoskeletal radiologist and was leading the osteoporosis and arthritis research group, which is a very large international research group of more than 100 people. And their focus was, and that's how they made the money, was to do central reading and quality assurance reading for clinical trials on new osteoporosis medication. A lot of them were industry sponsored, so they were able to actually hire all these people, someone like me. And they offered me a postdoc position, which was great, because I thought at that point that I wanted to do my residency in the US. I also did some research on novel imaging of bone, which was also a focus of that group. They did a lot on bone microarchitecture, bone strength assessment. And then when I spent a year with the group, learned a lot about how to manage clinical trials, but was also able to do my own research and write some papers, which were all really important when I then wanted to apply for residency. So I went through the match. I was very lucky to match at UCSF in radiology, but I had applied everywhere in the US. I would have gone anywhere as long as it was an academic institution, because I knew I wanted to do academics. So during my residency, I continued to do research, mostly our, Jim, you know, standard retrospective studies. You looked at 200 MRIs, 505 at this and 10 at this, and then published some papers, even co-authored 2 textbooks. And this is how I got interested in radiology and research.
Thank you, Miriam. Very interesting. And guys, tell us what brought you to Mass General then, and how did you get involved in your current research?
Yeah, so I had been then at UCSF for a while. I did my postdoc and then residency, and it would have been very easy to just stay on. I had a good reputation, people liked me, I knew the place well, but I thought I needed to go elsewhere and prove myself again, learn new things, get a different perspective. So I applied for a fellowship in musculoskeletal imaging and intervention here at MGH because, of course, of the excellent clinical reputation, but also because they were doing interventions that only very few people or places were doing. And then, of course, of the great research reputation. So when I started my fellowship, I wanted to continue research, of course, but I thought maybe I can go a step beyond the retrospective studies. And Martin Toriani, who is one of my colleagues in my division and a mentor, he had just received a K-23 NIH grant. And I thought, wow, NIH, something I've not thought about, but I thought maybe that's something I'm interested in. And at that time, my real passion was bone and soft tissue tumors. But I learned very quickly that it would be very difficult to get NIH funding for this. So he said, getting an NIH grant on what you were doing is hard. So Martin Toriani, he worked very closely with Steve Greenspoon from the neuroendocrine unit. And he introduced me to Anne Klebanski, who was doing research in anorexia nervosa at that time and had a faculty member who was writing her first R01 grant, and that was Karen Miller. And Anne said, why don't you work together and collaborate? So the R01 that Karen was writing was on administering growth hormone to people with obesity. And Anne and Karen said, well, why don't you write a K-23 grant using the same cohort, but then use some novel imaging method to assess intramyocellular lipids, which was a very hot topic. This is fat within muscle cells that you can quantify using MR spectroscopy. And then they said, why don't you evaluate their function in the pathogenesis of insulin resistance and the effect of growth hormone? So I came from my musculoskeletal background, imaging knees and sports medicine and tumors, and this was definitely not anything I had even considered and I was remotely familiar with. But I thought it's a great opportunity, something that doesn't come every day. So I read everything about body composition, intramyocellular lipids, visceral adiposity, how it impacts insulin resistance, and so on. I spent some time at the MR scanner, learned how to perform MR spectroscopy, and then wrote my K-23 grant when I was a first year attending. I was very lucky that I got the K-23 and Karen got her R01 because we needed both in order to work. If only I had gotten mine, I could have not done the recruitment of the subjects. Karen probably would have been fine without me. But that's how we started a really great collaboration. And the beginning, I felt more like a parasite. I was taking advantage of this great research infrastructure of the neuroendocrine unit, Karen's expertise in recruiting study subjects, something I was not familiar at all, and how to administer growth hormone. You need nurses. So I was very lucky that I was in this ecosystem that they had developed. Over the years, I think I could contribute more to the endocrine group with my expertise of using novel imaging. We then added new imaging methods to several of the grants that were written by investigators in the endocrine unit. To make them more competitive, and we over time became more equal collaborators and partners instead of me being the parasite.
That's great, Miriam. What a nice story. Are there unique attributes of that might be valuable to those who wish to maybe pursue a similar pathway to success?
Yeah, so my research is not really the typical imaging research, and definitely not what the typical musculoskeletal radiologist is doing or the research. And so what my research is, I'm investigating different fat depots and body composition and how it affects cardiometabolic risk and bone health. And my focus is across the weight spectrum and age spectrum. I do a lot of studies in anorexia nervosa and obesity. And I also now study children and adolescents and adults. So I use advanced imaging, as I said, MR spectroscopy to assess these different fat compartments, for example, intramyocellular lipids or fat within bone marrow. I'm also really interested in muscle function. We developed some techniques to assess we use phosphorus spectroscopy to assess muscle function. We built an MR compatible exercise machine where we have the research subjects as exercise within the scanner. And then you can do dynamic phosphorus spectroscopy, which is really cool. And you look at ATP recovery times. We also developed some new methods to assess brown fat using MR PET and PET CT, and then study what do these compartments, how do they influence cardiometabolic health and bone health. And we also developed very innovative methods to assess bone microarchitecture and bone strength. We have a high resolution CT where you can image at 80 microns. And then we use finite element analysis, something that's done in engineering. You're an engineer, Jim, to do mechanical testing on materials. Usually people use it for airplanes or bridges, but we actually use it to determine true bone strength and which force is necessary to make a bone break. So as you can see, I went back to my roots where I started with my osteoporosis research at UCSF, and now I do a lot of bone imaging. We also branched out to the liver. I'm a co-PI on an RO1 grant where we study non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and steatohepatitis. And I even branched out to the brain. I went beyond the neck. And in one grant, we're looking at hypothalamic inflammation and the effects on appetite in adolescents with obesity and the effects of oxytocin administration. That's in a collaboration with Liz Lawson and Madhu Misra from PD Endo. So what's unique about my research is that I don't focus on a specific imaging technique or a specific method, but I rather try to solve or answer a specific question using imaging. And I do a lot of team science. Most of my grants are collaborations with other specialties. I've expanded now beyond the neuroendocrine unit. I work with investigators in pediatrics and ortho, in neurology and hemonc, and I also use all my clinical skills, not just my imaging. For example, in one study, I performed bone marrow aspirations, and another one fat biopsies. These are all in my role that I do as a clinical interventional musculoskeletal radiologist.
That's great, Miriam. It sounds like putting the problem that you're trying to solve in the middle and enabling it with teams and with tools, rather than putting the teams or the tools in the middle may be your unique approach.
Nicely said. Good slogan.
What would be the clinical implications of your research, and maybe what are the next steps?
Yeah, so one of the main implications of what we found to date and what I'm really interested in is the bone-fat connection and how different fat depots influence bone health. And we always thought that obesity, I mean, it's bad for a lot of things, your cardiometabolic health, but the general thinking has always been that obesity at least protects against bone loss and osteoporosis. But we found that actually visceral adiposity especially is really bad for bones. And we also found that visceral adiposity and fat in between muscle cells, so-called intermuscular adipose tissue or IMAT, and sarcopenia, so low muscle mass, have negative effects on bone, but also your metabolic health. So the next step would be to translate these findings into real clinical practice. And many of these fat compartments can be assessed using CT, and especially CTs that are performed for other purposes. We call this opportunistic CT. And we could use, or we can quantify these body composition parameters on any CT that's done for abdominal pain or lung cancer follow-up. And now we have AI where you can literally assess thousands of CTs within minutes. You can quantify body composition. Martin Toriani in my group, he has developed an algorithm. We used to have poor medical students or visitors who like outline, visceral fat, muscle mass. Now the computer does it within seconds. And we have done studies in patients with COVID-19 and examined CTs that are performed for other purposes, mostly the lungs to predict outcome, and found that visceral adiposity, this intermuscular fat, predicted whether they got admitted to the ICU or mortality. We also have done some of those studies in patients with cancer to predict hospital lengths of stay or survival. So my ultimate goal is to increase the value of the hundreds, thousands of CTs we're doing every year and provide information such as sarcopenia or visceral adiposity or bone mineral density or bone strength to provide this in the report, and then the physician can help to initiate certain therapy or lifestyle modification. So my goal is to change the clinical practice and have these parameters in the clinical report, incorporate them so we can act on them. It's all information that we have, but we don't use it.
That's great, Miriam. It's a remarkable arc of a career from really very beginnings in your medical training to really tremendous clinical application. Thank you. Let's shift gears and talk a little bit about mentorship and what role mentorship has played for you in your career at MGH.
Yeah, so as I said, I was very lucky to have great mentors in my research career, and early on, Anne Klebansky and Karen Miller, they have really been instrumental. They really helped me also to navigate the NIH landscape and how to survive as a physician scientist. There are so many things that it's never taught in medical school or residency. They really taught me, like, one of the main things to always think about the next project and the next grant. So we were joking, but you get a grant, it's a 5-year grant. For the first year, you can feel really good. In years 2, you already have to think about the next one and what is the next project going to be, and then try to collect preliminary data. And so they taught me that early on, that you don't wait until the 4th year to think about the next one. What they also did, they encouraged me to branch out. That was really good. Don't say this and find new applications of your methods, collaborate with others, really go beyond the endocrine unit. First of all, go beyond radiology, but beyond the endocrine unit, and look for other collaborators, which I thought was very helpful. They taught me to be resilient. I have currently 5 NIH grants as PI or multi-PI, but for each of the grants I got awarded, there were probably 2 or 3 that were not even discussed. So it is a numbers game, and you cannot take things personally. And that's what Anne always said, is it a paper or a grant? Don't take it personally. So she said when she submits a grant, or now she probably doesn't anymore, she assumes it's not going to get funded, at least not on the first try. So she said, I submitted, move on. I think I probably have to resubmit. I just continue collecting preliminary data, anticipating that I have to do a revision. So I now try to do the same. I always assume the worst, that's probably not going to get funded, and then what would I do for the revision? And then I was also lucky, of course, in radiology. First, it was Martin Toriani, who was really critical in helping me getting my first K23 grant, and Jim Thrall, at that point, who was our chair, was very supportive. Madhu Misra was in pediatric endocrine. She worked a lot with her now. She helped me. She opened up a whole new field, pediatrics. We've written grant, and I learned a lot from her, especially how to deal with adolescents. And as adolescents, it's research subject. And then, of course, I also benefited really tremendously from your mentorship, Jim, and especially your sponsorship. And I really believe you need to have multiple mentors, and for different purposes, and one person can't do it all. And that's always something I tell my mentees. And then, because of my great role models and mentors, I felt that I have to do my part and give back. And I applied for and received an NIH K24, it's a mid-career mentoring grant, which is for physician scientists, and that is really to provide mentoring. And this has been one of the most rewarding grants and activities I'm doing. I'm also the co-director and PI of the NIH-funded Harvard Catalyst. It's a clinical medical investigator program. And this is now across all Harvard and all specialties. And that's where I mentor really the next generation of clinical translational scientists and researchers across all our Harvard affiliated hospitals and specialties. And that's really something I cherish a lot. And then on a national level, I also try to do my part in providing mentorship. I lead some NIH working groups to provide mentoring and also to bring well-being initiatives to other KL2 scholars. So I'm now trying to be a mentor myself.
That's great, Miriam. Thank you. You mentioned, and thank you for your kind words. You mentioned sponsorship. You've been involved in some initiatives to sponsor others. So can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so it's really important to have sponsors. And I always like to, when people say, what's the difference between a mentor and a sponsor? So the mentor, I always think about, he talks at you and has really your best interest in mind. It works sort of to help you to go to the next level. But a sponsor is someone who talks about you, and preferably when you're not in the room. So this is someone who nominates you for awards, who suggests your name for leadership position. And it's very hard to advance in your career without sponsors. And especially for women, people often say that women are over-mentored but under-sponsored. So sponsorship is really important. And that's why, Jim, you have been a great sponsor for me and others as well. And at the Center for Faculty Development, which I direct, we started a program, the Anne Podansky Visiting Scholar Program. That's something that was built out of a COVID-19 pandemic to support women who were disproportionately affected by COVID. One of the reasons why women are not represented at high academic ranks is that you have to travel to give national or international presentations. And if you have a family or small children at home, it's very difficult to take a week off. So now the silver lining of the COVID-19 pandemic was that now all the visiting professorships are virtual. So this award that we developed entails to serve as a virtual visiting professor at a national or international institution, to get a mentor at that institution. And then we also involve the women in small group leadership and coaching with other women here at MGH so they can build a community and a network. And the people who serve on the selection committee, they are true sponsors. And I just want to give a shout out to all of them who have helped me over the years. We're now selected the third cohort, because they don't only select the women to get the award. No, they are the one who pick up the phone and or write the email to their colleagues around the world and sponsor the other women. Basically, they use their reputation to sponsor someone else. And so this is true sponsorship. The program now has been so successful that we, as I said, we continued, we selected the third cohort. We now have almost 100 women involved. And from the first two cohorts, over 40% of the women got promoted academically, and over 60% started a new leadership position. And I love the story of one of the postdocs who was looking for a faculty position, and she was giving her virtual visiting scholar lecture and was offered a tenure track position on the spot when she gave her lecture. So that makes me feel great.
That's fantastic. You know, in recent years, you've become more and more involved in administration, much to our benefit, and I'm extremely grateful to your roles in faculty affairs and operations, and you have completed an MBA recently. Where do you see your future heading?
Yeah, well, if you had asked me that 5 years ago, I would have said I want to continue my research, do a day of clinical work, and maybe one day be a vice chair for research in radiology. That also maybe one day. And administration was, but it was not really something I aspired to, and I was not interested at all, honestly. But when I became full professor about, I think it was about 5 years ago, a lot of things changed, and suddenly I became very popular. I got offered leadership positions, and one was the KL2 position, but then one was from you to be vice chair for faculty affairs in our department. And that was honestly something I had never crossed my mind. but faculty affairs both mentoring. And at that point, I was already directing the Harvard KL2 program, and I had just received my K24 mentoring grant. So mentoring was really front and center of everything I was doing. And you had asked me to start a mentoring program in radiology. And this is one of the main reasons why I accepted the position. But in the role, I realized that I really liked administration. So thank you for offering it to me. I love to improve things, make them better. And then when you're vice chair, you're more in the position to actually do so and make a change. And I was really just excited to design the things that help our faculty, be it the mentoring program. We started a leadership development program, something that helps them and advances their careers. We also worked on this compensation model for researchers, which was really rewarding because I could see the immediate impact. Then I became the director of the Center for Faculty Development, where I'm now doing the same thing just at the hospital level. But doing all of these activities and being in these roles, I noticed that I needed more formal training in business administration and leadership. And that's why I decided to do the MBA at MIT, which I completed in May. And I loved the program, especially because it was not healthcare focused. And I have to say, I learned as much from my colleagues who came from all kinds of different industries. I learned as much from them as from the formal classes. And the great thing of the program is that you learn, you have classes over the weekend, and then you come to work on Monday and you can immediately apply whatever you learned over the weekend at work. So I especially enjoyed operations, as you know, and finance, and everything I learned has been extremely useful in my clinical work, but also research. And one of the impacts was that I see the world now with different eyes. Everything is a little more complex, but I now have more tools and a network to tackle complex problems. So as you can see, I love research, I love education and faculty development, and let's see, would love to apply my skills in operation and management at the next level, whatever that will be.
That's great, Miriam, and thank you so much. You know, the half hour has gone by so quickly because your story is so compelling and so fascinating, and congratulations on just a remarkable career to date, and we look forward to watching your career continue to evolve from this point forward. And thank you for sharing your thoughts and experiences with us all.
Right.
I think that closes out our session today, and want to thank everyone who joined us for their lunch hour. And again, many thanks to Dr. Miriam Bredella for sharing her insights.
Thanks so much, Jim, and thanks everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.